world held its breath. After 70 years of unwavering service, Queen Elizabeth II had passed, leaving behind not just a grieving nation, but a monarchy at the crossroads of history. In an instant, everything changed. The man who had spent decades preparing for this moment was no longer the Prince of Wales. He was King Charles III, and standing beside him in this new chapter were two people who would capture the world's imagination like no other royal couple in modern times. William Arthur Philip Lewis, the boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin at age 15, was now the Prince of Wales and heir to the throne. Catherine Elizabeth Middleton, the commoner who had married her prince in a fairy tale wedding, watched by 2 billion people, was now destined to be queen. But this wasn't just another chapter in the royal story. This was the moment that would define the future of the British monarchy. What happens when cameras capture every glance, every gesture, every moment of raw emotion as two people navigate the most scrutinized role transition in the world? How do you step into shoes that have been worn by legends, knowing that millions are watching your every move, analyzing your body language, dissecting your choices, and forming opinions that will echo through history? This is the story of that pivotal moment, when William and Catherine stepped forward not as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, but as the future King and Queen of England. It's a story of duty and devotion, of private grief made public, of a marriage tested under the most intense spotlight imaginable. It's about two people who had to find their footing in roles they had prepared for their entire adult lives, yet somehow nothing could have truly prepared them for the reality of that moment. Behind the palace walls, away from the cameras and the crowds, what really happened during those first crucial hours and days? How do you comfort a nation while processing your own grief? How do you honor the past while stepping boldly into the future? And most importantly, how do you remain authentic to who you are when the weight of a 1,000-year-old institution suddenly rests on your shoulders? The answers lie in the extraordinary story that unfolded as the world watched, waited, and witnessed the emergence of a new royal era. One that would be defined not just by tradition and protocol, but by the very human story of two people rising to meet their destiny. The morning of September 8th, 2022, began like any other for William and Catherine at Adelaide Cottage in Windsor. The children were preparing for school, and the familiar routine of family life provided a sense of normalcy that both treasured amid their royal duties. Catherine was reviewing her schedule for the upcoming weeks, including several important engagements focused on early childhood development. Her primary area of royal work, William was preparing for a series of meetings related to his environmental initiatives and the Earthshot Prize. Neither could have imagined that before the day ended, their entire world would transform in the most profound way possible. The first indication that something was seriously wrong came through a phone call to William around 10 in the morning. The voice on the other end was Charles, his father, and the gravity in his tone immediately set William's pulse racing. The Queen's health had taken a dramatic turn for the worse. She was at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, surrounded by her closest family members, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "You need to come to Scotland immediately," Charles told his eldest son, "and bring Catherine." William felt the familiar weight that had settled on his shoulders many times before during family crises, but this time it felt different, heavier, more final. He looked across their kitchen at Catherine, who was helping Charlotte pack her school bag, her auburn hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. She looked up at him, and he could see in her eyes that she already knew something was terribly wrong. "We need to go to Balmoral," William said simply, and Catherine nodded without hesitation. In their 12 years of marriage, she had learned to read the subtle changes in his expression, the way his jaw tightened when duty called, the way his shoulders straightened when he shifted from husband and father into his royal role. But this morning, she saw something else in his face, a vulnerability that reminded her of the young man she had first met at university, before the weight of his destiny had fully settled upon him. The logistics of royal travel moved with practiced efficiency. Within an hour, their protection officers had arranged transportation to RAF Northolt, where they would board a flight to Aberdeen. But even as they moved through the familiar motions of an emergency royal journey, both William and Catherine understood that this trip would be unlike any other they had taken. During the flight to Scotland, William stared out at the countryside below, his thoughts racing between memories of his grandmother and the magnitude of what might be happening. The Queen had always been the one constant in his life, the steady presence who had guided him through the tumultuous years after his mother's death. She had been there for his graduation from St. Andrews, where he had first truly fallen in love with Catherine. She had given her blessing to their marriage and had watched with evident pride as Catherine had adapted to royal life with such grace and dedication. Catherine, sitting beside him on the aircraft, reached over and took his hand. She didn't need to say anything. In the complexity of royal life, where every gesture was scrutinized and every emotion had to be carefully managed, the simple act of holding hands became profound. It was a reminder that whatever happened in the hours ahead, they would face it together. As their plane descended toward Aberdeen, both could see the gathering storm clouds over the Scottish Highlands. It seemed fitting, somehow, that nature itself was reflecting the gravity of the moment. Catherine squeezed William's hand tighter as they prepared to land, both understanding that they were flying not just toward a family crisis, but toward a moment that would define the rest of their lives. The journey from Aberdeen to Balmoral Castle took them through some of the most beautiful countryside in Scotland, but neither William nor Catherine was in a mood to appreciate the scenery. Capacity. Instead, they sat in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what they might find when they arrived at the castle that had been such a special place for the Queen throughout her long reign. William's phone buzzed constantly with updates from various members of the royal household, but the news remained frustratingly vague. The Queen was comfortable, they were told, that she was surrounded by family. But the urgency with which they had all been summoned to Scotland told its own story. When they finally arrived at Balmoral, the sight that greeted them confirmed their worst fears. The castle, usually a place of relaxation and family gathering, felt different. There was a solemnity in the air, a sense of history being made. Staff members moved with the quiet efficiency that comes during moments of great significance, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. Charles met them at the entrance, and William was struck by how much his father seemed to have aged in just the few weeks since they had last seen each other. The weight of impending responsibility was already visible in Charles's bearing, the transformation from heir to king beginning even before it was officially necessary. "Head, how is she?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles shook his head slowly. "Peaceful. But we need to prepare ourselves." The walk through Balmoral's familiar corridors felt different that day. These were the same halls where William had spent countless summer holidays as a child, where he had learned to fish and hunt, where he had first brought Catherine to meet his grandmother in an informal setting years before their engagement. Now each step felt weighted with history and finality. Anne, the Princess Royal, met them outside the Queen's private sitting room. William's aunt had always been known for her direct, no-nonsense approach, but even she seemed subdued by the magnitude of the moment. She briefed him quickly on the Queen's condition and the arrangements that were being made, but her voice carried an unusual tremor. "She's been asking for everyone," Anne told them, "that she wants to see you both." The moment when William and Catherine entered the Queen's private quarters would remain etched in their memories forever. The woman who had seemed so indomitable throughout her 70-year reign looked fragile in a way they had never seen before. Yet her eyes still held the keen intelligence and warmth that had characterized her throughout her life. "William," the Queen said softly, her voice still carrying the authority that had defined her reign, even though it was now barely above a whisper. "Beatty and Catherine, my dear." Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes as she approached the bed. This woman had become not just her sovereign, but a grandmother figure who had guided her through the complexities of royal life with patience and wisdom. The Queen had been the one to explain the subtle protocols that governed royal behavior, the one who had shared stories about the monarchy's history, the one who had made Catherine feel truly welcomed into the family. "Your Majesty," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion as she took the Queen's hand. The Queen smiled, that familiar expression that had reassured millions of people around the world during times of crisis and celebration alike. "You've been such a wonderful addition to our family, my dear. William is very lucky to have found you." For William, seeing his grandmother in this state brought back all the emotions he had felt during his mother's final days. But this was different. This was the woman who had been the anchor for his entire family, the steady presence who had weathered every storm and guided the monarchy through decades of change and challenge. "Granny," he said, using the informal term he had called her since childhood, "we're all here for you." The Queen nodded slowly, her eyes moving between William and Catherine, with an expression that seemed to convey both sadness and profound love. "You two have such important work ahead of you. The monarchy will be in good hands." Those words would haunt both William and Catherine in the hours that followed. The Queen wasn't just expressing confidence in their abilities. She was passing on a responsibility that had defined her entire adult life. The weight of that moment, the realization that they were receiving what amounted to a final blessing from the woman who had devoted her life to the institution they would one day lead, was almost overwhelming. As the afternoon wore on, more family members arrived at Balmoral. Harry, William's younger brother, made the journey from London, though he arrived separately from William and Catherine, a reflection of the tensions that had developed within the family over the previous few years. Edward and Sophie arrived from their home in Surrey, along with Andrew, who had been staying nearby. The atmosphere in the castle was unlike anything any of them had experienced before. This wasn't just the death of a beloved family member. It was the end of an era. The Queen had been the only monarch most people alive had ever known. Her reign had spanned from the post-war period through the digital age, from the era of empire to modern multiculturalism. She had been a constant in a world of constant change. Throughout the afternoon and into the early evening, family members took turns spending time with the Queen. Each conversation felt precious, final, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. The Queen, even in her weakened state, seemed determined to speak with each of her loved ones, to offer final words of guidance and affection. For Catherine, these hours at Balmoral represented more than just a family farewell. They were the final preparation for a role she had been gradually taking on for more than a decade. As she sat beside the Queen's bed, holding the hand of the woman who would always be her model for royal duty and service, Catherine understood that she was not just saying goodbye to a beloved grandmother-in-law, but receiving a final lesson in what it meant to serve the crown with dignity and dedication. When the Queen's breathing became more labored in the early evening, the family gathered around her bed. Charles held one of her hands, Anne held the other, and William and Catherine stood nearby, with Edward and Sophie. The moment was intensely private, yet somehow they all understood that it would soon become intensely public as well. At 6:30 p.m., surrounded by her family and the place she had loved most, Queen Elizabeth II passed away peacefully. In service, who had promised in her 21st birthday speech that her whole life, whether long or short, would be devoted to service, had fulfilled that promise to the very end. The silence that followed was profound. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, as the reality of what had just happened settled over everyone present. Charles, who had been preparing for this moment his entire life, was now king. William was now the heir to the throne. Catherine was now destined to be queen. But in that moment, they weren't thinking about titles or responsibilities. They were thinking about the remarkable woman they had just lost, and the impossible task of continuing her legacy while making it their own. The immediate aftermath of the Queen's death at Balmoral Castle was a study in controlled chaos. Within minutes of her passing, a carefully rehearsed protocol known as Operation London Bridge swung into action. Private secretaries made hushed phone calls to Downing Street, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and other key figures in British government and society. The BBC was notified, and preparations began for the formal announcement that would change not just Britain, but the entire Commonwealth realm. William and Catherine found themselves thrust into roles they had spent years preparing for, yet nothing could have truly prepared them for the emotional reality of that moment. As William automatically became the Prince of Wales and Catherine the Prince of Wales, they were simultaneously processing their grief while being briefed on the dozens of decisions that needed to be made in the coming hours. Charles, now King Charles III, was remarkably composed as he navigated the first hours of his reign. But William could see the weight settling on his father's shoulders, the transformation from heir to sovereign happening in real time. There was a brief, private moment when Charles pulled William aside in one of Balmoral's quiet corridors. "Everything changes now," Charles said simply, his voice carrying both sadness and resolution. "For all of us." William nodded, understanding the profound truth in those words. His father was now the king, which meant William's own responsibilities would expand exponentially. More importantly, it meant that he and Catherine would be moving even closer to the center of public attention and scrutiny. The formal announcement of the Queen's death came at 6:30 p.m. London time, exactly when she had passed away at Balmoral. Within seconds, the news was flashing across television screens around the world. In London, crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace, many in tears, laying flowers and sharing memories of the only monarch most of them had ever known. But at Balmoral, the royal family was dealing with the intensely personal side of this historic moment. The Queen's body was prepared with dignity and reverence by her closest staff members, people who had served her faithfully for decades. The sight of these devoted employees, many of them visibly emotional, caring for their beloved employer one final time, brought home the human cost of this transition in a way that no protocol could capture. Catherine found herself in the unique position of being both an insider. She had been part of the royal family for over a decade, but she had not grown up with the Queen as William had. Her grief was real and deep, but it was different from that of the blood relatives surrounding her. Yet in some ways, this gave her a perspective that was invaluable during those first difficult hours. While William and his father dealt with the immediate constitutional implications of the Queen's death, Catherine focused on the human elements. She spent time with the staff members who were struggling with their own grief, offering comfort and understanding, their routine to sense that something fundamental had changed in their world. Most importantly, Catherine began thinking about the children. George, Charlotte, and Louis were at school in London, unaware that their great-grandmother had died, unaware that their father was now the heir to the throne, unaware that their entire lives had just changed in the most dramatic way possible. The question of how and when to tell them weighed heavily on both William and Catherine's minds. The decision was made to allow the children to finish their school day normally, then break the news to them privately at Adelaide Cottage that evening. It was a choice that reflected both William and Catherine's commitment to giving their children as normal a childhood as possible, even as their roles within the monarchy became increasingly significant. As evening fell at Balmoral, the reality of the media tension began to set in. Reporters and camera crews were gathering at the castle gates, and television networks around the world were beginning their wall-to-wall coverage of the Queen's death and the accession of King Charles III. Every member of the royal family would soon be under intense scrutiny, but William and Catherine would face particular attention as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. The helicopter journey back to London that night was unlike any flight William and Catherine had ever taken together. Below them, they could see cars pulled over to the side of motorways as people listened to radio updates about the Queen's death. In cities and towns across the country, flags were being lowered to half-staff, and impromptu gatherings were forming as people sought to share their grief and memories. Catherine looked out at the lights of London as they approached the capital, thinking about the millions of people below who were processing this news, many of whom would look to William and her for comfort and continuity in the days ahead. The weight of that responsibility felt almost overwhelming, but she drew strength from William's presence beside her and from the years of preparation they had both undergone for exactly this moment. The return to Adelaide Cottage presented them with one of their most challenging tasks as parents. How do you tell your children that their beloved Gangan has died? How do you explain that their father is now the heir to the throne? How do you help them understand that their lives will never be quite the same? George, at 9 years old, was mature enough to understand the basic facts of what had happened, but the implications for his own future were still abstract. Charlotte, 7, was devastated by the loss of her great-grandmother, with whom she had developed a particularly close relationship. Louis, only 4, struggled to understand why everyone seemed so sad and why there were so many serious conversations happening around him. William and Catherine handled the conversation with the same careful balance they had brought to their children's upbringing from the beginning. They were honest about the sadness of losing someone they all loved, while also emphasizing the positive memories and the important legacy the Queen had left behind. Eventually explained that Daddy would now have new responsibilities, but that their family's love and commitment to each other would remain unchanged. The next morning brought the first real test of how William and Catherine would navigate their new roles. The decision had been made for them to return to London to be present for some of the initial ceremonies and arrangements, but first they needed to make their first public appearance as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. The location chosen was Windsor Castle, where crowds had been gathering since the announcement of the Queen's death. It was a symbolic choice, reflecting the family's connection to Windsor and their commitment to being accessible to the people during this time of national mourning. Catherine spent considerable time that morning thinking about what to wear for this first appearance. In the royal world, clothing choices are never merely personal. They are communications in themselves. She ultimately chose a black dress with a simple pearl necklace, an outfit that conveyed both appropriate mourning and understated elegance. The pearls had particular significance. They had been a gift from the Queen years earlier, and wearing them was a subtle way of honoring her memory. William, meanwhile, was receiving briefings from his new private secretary about the expanded role he would be taking on as Prince of Wales. The Duchy of Cornwall, which provides income for the heir to the throne, would now be his responsibility. The Prince's Trust and other charities that had been Charles's focus would need new leadership. Most significantly, William would now be expected to take on an even more active role in supporting his father's reign while preparing for his own eventual accession to the throne. The drive to Windsor Castle that morning took them through London streets that were noticeably different from usual. There were more people out than normal, many carrying flowers, many wearing black, many simply standing and talking in small groups. The mood was somber but not despairing. There was a sense of collective processing of a nation coming to terms with a profound change. At Windsor Castle, the scene was even more dramatic. Thousands of people had gathered, creating an impromptu memorial with flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes. The crowd was diverse. Elderly people who remembered the Queen's coronation, young families with children, tourists who had found themselves witnesses to history, local residents who felt a personal connection to the royal family. When William and Catherine's car arrived at the castle gates, the crowd's reaction was immediate and emotional. There was applause, but also tears and calls of "God save the King" and "Long live the Prince of Wales." For Catherine, this was her first experience of being greeted as the Princess of Wales, a title that carried particular weight because of its association with Diana, William's mother. The walk among the crowds at Windsor was emotionally exhausting but profoundly meaningful. Person after person approached them with condolences, with memories of the Queen, with expressions of support for the new reign. Catherine found herself moved by the genuine affection people expressed for the Queen, and by their obvious desire to offer comfort to the royal family during this difficult time. An elderly woman in her 80s approached Catherine with tears in her eyes. "She was like a grandmother to all of us," the woman said, referring to the Queen. "Thank you for being here with us." Catherine took the woman's hand and spent several minutes talking with her about her memories of the Queen. It was a moment that encapsulated what would become Catherine's approach to her role as Princess of Wales. Genuine engagement, authentic emotion, and a willingness to share in both the grief and the celebration of the Queen's remarkable life. William, meanwhile, was struck by how many people wanted to share specific memories of encounters with the Queen. A former soldier talked about meeting her during a regimental visit 30 years earlier. A teacher described bringing her class to see the Queen during a royal visit to their school. And avenged how she had named her daughter Elizabeth in honor of the Queen. These conversations reinforced for both William and Catherine that their grief, while intensely personal, was also part of a much larger collective mourning. The Queen had not just been their grandmother and sovereign, she had been a presence in millions of lives, a symbol of stability and continuity that transcended politics and personal circumstances. As they prepared to leave Windsor that afternoon, both William and Catherine understood that this had been more than just their first public appearance in their new roles. It had been their introduction to the complex relationship they would now have with the British people, a relationship built on mutual respect and affection, but they now carried the hopes and expectations of millions of people who were looking to them for leadership during a time of significant change. The drive back to London took them past crowds that were still gathering, still processing, still trying to make sense of this historic moment. For William and Catherine, sitting quietly in the back of their car as London's familiar landmarks passed by, the magnitude of their new responsibilities was becoming increasingly clear. They were no longer just senior members of the royal family. They were now central figures in an institution that would need to adapt and evolve while maintaining its essential character and purpose. The following days brought a whirlwind of activity as Britain prepared for the most significant state funeral in generations. William and Catherine found themselves at the center of planning efforts that involved not just the royal household, but government officials, military leaders, religious figures, and representatives from around the world. Every decision, from the seating arrangements in Westminster Abbey to the route of the funeral procession, required their input and approval. But beyond the logistics and protocol, William and Catherine were grappling with something far more personal and complex: how to honor the Queen's memory while establishing their own identity as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. The weight of history was particularly heavy for Catherine, who now held a title that would forever be associated with Diana, Princess of Wales. The comparisons were inevitable, and Catherine was acutely aware of them. Diana had transformed the role of Princess of Wales, bringing a warmth and accessibility that had revolutionized public expectations of royal behavior. Now Catherine would need to honor that legacy while making the role her own, bringing her own strengths and perspectives to one of the most scrutinized positions in the world. In quiet moments between official duties, William and Catherine talked extensively about how they wanted to approach their expanded roles. They had always been a team, supporting each other through the challenges of royal life. But now their partnership would be more crucial than ever. The decisions they made in the coming months would set the tone for the next phase of the monarchy and potentially influence how their own children would experience royal life. The children remained their top priority throughout this period. George, Charlotte, and Louis were struggling with the loss of their great-grandmother while also trying to understand the changes happening around them. The family's move from their modest Adelaide cottage to more prominent royal residences was being discussed. But William and Catherine were reluctant to disrupt their children's lives more than necessary during this already difficult time. Catherine spent hours talking with the children about their memories of the Queen, helping them process their grief while also beginning to explain the broader significance of what had happened. She was struck by how perceptive the children were, particularly George, who seemed to understand instinctively that his father's new role as Prince of Wales meant changes for all of them. The week leading up to the Queen's funeral was filled with a series of events and ceremonies that gave William and Catherine their first real test as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. There was the procession to move the Queen's coffin from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall for the lying in state period. There were receptions for the heads of state and government leaders who were arriving for the funeral. There were private family moments that had to be balanced with very public displays of grief and remembrance. One of the most challenging aspects of this period was the constant media attention. Every gesture, every expression, every choice of clothing was analyzed and interpreted by commentators around the world. Catherine, in particular, found herself under intense scrutiny as people tried to assess how she was handling her new role and whether she was living up to the legacy of her predecessor. The decision about what the children would wear to the funeral became a significant issue. There was debate about whether they were old enough to participate in such a solemn and emotionally intense event, but ultimately William and Catherine decided that George and Charlotte should attend, while Louis would stay home due to his young age. The sight of the two older children walking behind their great-grandmother's coffin would become one of the most poignant images of the entire funeral. Catherine's choice to include small personal touches in her funeral attire spoke to her approach to her new role. Along with traditional mourning dress, she wore a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to the Queen, and a diamond brooch that had been a wedding gift from her late grandmother-in-law. These subtle references to her personal relationship with the Queen were noticed and appreciated by those who understood the significance of such details in royal protocol. The funeral itself was a masterpiece of pageantry and emotion that showcased both the continuity of British institutions and the genuine affection felt for the Queen by people around the world. Reciprocal of Catherine sitting in Westminster Abbey surrounded by world leaders and members of the extended royal family. The service was both a public duty and an intensely private moment of farewell. Catherine was particularly moved by the sight of the Queen's corgis, Moak and Sandy, waiting at Windsor Castle as the funeral procession arrived for the private burial service. These dogs had been constant companions to the Queen in her final years, and their presence served as a reminder of the personal, human side of the woman who had devoted her life to public service. The private burial at St. George's Chapel in Windsor was limited to family members and close friends, giving William and Catherine a chance to say their final goodbyes away from the cameras and crowds. It was here, surrounded by the intimate setting of the chapel, where they had attended so many family celebrations over the years, that the full reality of their loss and their new responsibilities finally settled in. In the days immediately following the funeral, William and Catherine faced the challenge of transitioning from a period of intense mourning and ceremony to the practical work of fulfilling their new roles. The Duchy of Cornwall, which William had inherited as the new Prince of Wales, required immediate attention. The various charities and organizations that looked to them for leadership needed reassurance about continuity and future direction. Catherine threw herself into understanding the full scope of her new responsibilities with characteristic thoroughness. She met with advisors, studied briefing documents, and visited organizations that would now be under her patronage. Her approach was methodical and thoughtful, reflecting the same careful preparation that had characterized her adaptation to royal life from the beginning of her relationship with William. One of her first major decisions as Princess of Wales involved her signature issue of early childhood development. The question was whether to continue the initiatives she had begun as Duchess of Cambridge or to expand them significantly now that she had a more prominent platform. After extensive consultation with experts and advisors, Catherine decided to use her enhanced profile to launch an even more ambitious campaign focused on the first 5 years of life. Doubted William, meanwhile, was grappling with the expansion of his environmental work now that he had access to the resources and platform of the Prince of Wales title. The Earthshot Prize, his signature environmental initiative, could now be scaled up significantly, but he was careful to ensure that any expansion maintained the innovation and impact focus that had made it successful. The couple's first joint engagement as Prince and Princess of Wales took place at a children's hospital in London, chosen deliberately to highlight Catherine's focus on early childhood while also demonstrating their continued commitment to hands-on charitable work. The visit was carefully planned to be low-key and focused on the patients and families they were meeting, rather than on the media attention their new titles would inevitably generate. Catherine's interaction with the children at the hospital revealed how naturally she had grown into her royal role over the years. She was comfortable and genuine with the young patients, spending extended time with families and showing real interest in their stories and experiences. The nursing staff commented afterward on how her presence had lifted spirits and brought genuine joy to children who were dealing with serious health challenges. William's contribution to the visit focused on the mental health aspects of serious childhood illness, an area where he had developed significant expertise through his work with various mental health charities. Parents, about the stress and anxiety of having a seriously ill child, were deeply informed by his own experiences with loss and trauma. The success of this first official engagement as Prince and Princess of Wales gave both William and Catherine confidence that they could successfully navigate their expanded roles while maintaining the authentic, caring approach that had characterized their work as Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. But they were also aware that this was just the beginning of a much longer journey. The question of where they would live became a significant issue during this period. Adelaide Cottage in Windsor had been perfect for their life as a young family when William was second in line to the throne. But now there were discussions about whether they needed a more prominent residence that would better reflect their status as future king and queen. The debate was complicated by their desire to maintain as normal a life as possible for their children, while also acknowledging the increased security and logistical requirements that came with William's new position. After extensive discussions with security experts and household staff, they decided to remain at Adelaide Cottage for the immediate future, while also taking on additional duties at Kensington Palace and other royal residences. Catherine's adaptation to the increased attention that came with being Princess of Wales was particularly impressive to those who worked with her closely. She had always been careful and thoughtful about her public appearances, but now every aspect of her presentation was scrutinized even more intensely. Her fashion choices, her speaking style, her body language, even her hairstyles became subjects of international commentary. Rather than being overwhelmed by this attention, Catherine seemed to embrace it as an opportunity to use her platform more effectively. She began working with a broader range of designers, including more British and Commonwealth brands, as a way of supporting fashion industries throughout the realm. Her clothing choices became more deliberately symbolic, often incorporating colors or styles that reflected the causes she was supporting or the places she was visiting. The first major speech Catherine gave as Princess of Wales was at a conference on early childhood development, and it demonstrated how much her confidence and expertise had grown over the years. She spoke without notes for over 15 minutes, presenting complex research findings in accessible language while also sharing personal insights from her years of work in this field. The audience's response was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly for Catherine, she felt that she had successfully used her platform to advance important work rather than simply fulfilling ceremonial duties. This balance between substance and symbolism would become a defining characteristic of her approach to the role of Princess of Wales. As the first months of their new roles unfolded, both William and Catherine began to understand more fully how their lives had changed. The increased attention was manageable because they had been gradually preparing for it over many years, but the sense of responsibility was more intense than either had fully anticipated. They were no longer just representing themselves or even just the royal family. They were now symbols of the institution of monarchy itself, carrying the hopes and expectations of millions of people who looked to them for leadership, inspiration, and continuity during a time of significant change and uncertainty. The first Christmas season as Prince and Princess of Wales brought unique challenges and opportunities for William and Catherine. The royal family's traditional Christmas celebrations at Sandringham House took on added significance as it marked the first major holiday without the Queen's steadying presence. King Charles III would be hosting the family gathering for the first time as monarch, and William and Catherine would need to help set the tone for this new era while honoring cherished traditions. The children were particularly aware of the changes this Christmas would bring. George, Charlotte, and Louis had grown up with their great-grandmother as the central figure of family celebrations, and her absence was felt keenly by all three, and spent considerable time in the weeks leading up to Christmas, helping them process their continuing grief, while also finding ways to celebrate the Queen's memory as part of their holiday traditions. The decision was made to include some of the Queen's favorite Christmas customs in their own family celebrations at Adelaide Cottage before joining the larger royal gathering at Sandringham. Catherine arranged for the children to help prepare some of the Queen's favorite Christmas treats, including her beloved chocolate biscuit cake. These activities served both as a way of remembering their great-grandmother and as a means of teaching the children about the importance of tradition and continuity. William found himself in the complex position of supporting his father through Charles's first Christmas as king, while also establishing his own family's traditions as Prince and Princess of Wales. The weight of being first in line to the throne was particularly evident during this period, as various royal traditions and responsibilities that had been Charles's for decades were now being shared or gradually transferred to William. The annual Christmas walkabout at Sandringham, where the royal family traditionally greets well-wishers after attending church service on Christmas morning, took on special significance as the first such event of the new reign. William and Catherine were aware that the public would be watching closely to see how the family was adapting to their new roles, and whether the warmth and accessibility that had characterized the Queen's approach would continue under King Charles III. Catherine's choice of outfit for the Christmas walkabout was carefully considered to reflect both appropriate formality and personal warmth. She chose a deep blue coat by a British designer, paired with accessories that included a brooch that had belonged to the Queen. The overall effect was one of respectful mourning combined with forward-looking optimism, exactly the message she hoped to convey in her new role. The crowd's response to William and Catherine at Sandringham was overwhelmingly positive, with many people expressing both condolences for their loss and support for their expanded roles. Catherine was particularly moved by the number of people who shared memories of the Queen and expressed confidence in the future of the monarchy under King Charles III and eventually under William's leadership. The one conversation that stayed with Catherine throughout the day was with a young mother who had brought her two small children to see the royal family. The woman thanked Catherine for being such a positive role model for working mothers and expressed hope that her daughters would grow up in a world where they could balance family and career responsibilities as successfully as Catherine had managed to do. This interaction highlighted one of the most significant aspects of Catherine's new role as Princess of Wales. She had become not just a royal figure, but a symbol of modern womanhood for many people around the world. Her ability to manage her royal duties while being a devoted mother to three young children resonated with women who were facing similar challenges in their own lives. The new year brought the first major international tour for William and Catherine as Prince and Princess of Wales. The destination was the Caribbean, where several Commonwealth realms were wrestling with questions about their future relationship with the British monarchy. The tour would be both a diplomatic mission and a test of how effectively William and Catherine could represent the crown on the international stage in their new roles. Preparation for the Caribbean tour was extensive, involving briefings from Foreign Office officials, meetings with Commonwealth experts, and careful coordination with local governments and organizations. Catherine immersed herself in learning about the history and current challenges of each country they would visit, determined to engage meaningfully with the issues and opportunities they would encounter. The tour began in Belize, where William and Catherine participated in events celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, while also acknowledging the complex history of colonialism and its ongoing impact. Catherine's approach to these sensitive topics was thoughtful and nuanced, acknowledging past injustices while also highlighting positive developments and shared opportunities for the future. In Jamaica, the couple faced more direct challenges regarding the monarchy's future role. Prime Minister Andrew Holness made it clear that Jamaica intended to pursue becoming a republic, removing King Charles III as head of state. William's response to this announcement was gracious and understanding, reflecting a maturity and diplomatic skill that impressed both local observers and international media. Catherine's engagement with young people throughout the Caribbean tour was particularly impactful. She participated in discussions about climate change, economic opportunity, and social justice with students and young professionals who represented the future leadership of these nations. Her ability to listen thoughtfully and engage substantively with complex issues demonstrated how much her confidence and expertise had grown over the years. The highlight of the Caribbean tour was a reception in Barbados, where William delivered a speech that addressed both the historical legacy of colonialism and his vision for the future relationship between Britain and Commonwealth nations. The speech, which Catherine had helped him develop and refine, was praised for its honesty, humility, and forward-looking perspective. Upon returning to Britain, William and Catherine faced immediate challenges related to their domestic responsibilities. The cost of living crisis was affecting millions of British families, and there were questions about how the royal family should respond to economic hardship while maintaining their traditional role and lifestyle. Catherine's response was to launch a new initiative focused on supporting families facing financial difficulties, particularly in relation to child welfare and development. And social service organizations, she developed programs that provided both immediate assistance and longer-term support for parents struggling to provide for their children. William, meanwhile, used his platform as Prince of Wales to advocate for sustainable economic development and environmental responsibility as interconnected challenges. His speeches during this period emphasized the connection between economic stability and environmental health, arguing that addressing climate change was not just an environmental imperative, but an economic necessity. The couple's approach to the cost of living crisis demonstrated their understanding that their roles as Prince and Princess of Wales required them to be relevant and responsive to contemporary challenges while maintaining the dignity and continuity that people expected from the monarchy. It was a delicate balance, but one they managed with increasing skill and confidence. As spring arrived, William and Catherine faced their first coronation season as Prince and Princess of Wales. King Charles III's coronation would be their first major ceremonial event in their new roles, and they would play central parts in the ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Catherine's preparation for the coronation involved extensive work with designers, historians, and protocol experts to ensure that her appearance would be appropriate for the solemnity of the occasion while also reflecting her personal style and values. The final choice was a dress by a British designer that incorporated traditional elements with modern touches, paired with a tiara that had belonged to the Queen. William's role in the coronation ceremony included the traditional act of swearing fealty to his father as the new king, a moment that would symbolize both the continuity of the monarchy and the transition to a new generation of royal leadership. The weight of this responsibility was something he had been preparing for his entire life, but the reality of the moment was still emotionally overwhelming. The coronation itself was a masterpiece of pageantry that showcased both the ancient traditions of the monarchy and its adaptation to contemporary values and expectations. William and Catherine's participation in the ceremony was flawless, demonstrating their complete comfort with royal protocol while also conveying genuine emotion and commitment to service. Catherine's behavior throughout the coronation ceremony was particularly noted by observers. Her obvious pride in William and support for King Charles III was visible throughout the service, but so was her own confidence and authority as Princess of Wales. She had clearly grown into her role as a senior royal figure in her own right, not just as William's wife. The coronation celebrations provided William and Catherine with opportunities to engage with thousands of people from across Britain and the Commonwealth who had come to London for the historic event. Their interactions during these celebrations revealed how comfortable they had become with the increased attention and responsibility that came with their roles as Prince and Princess of Wales. As the coronation season concluded, Both William and Catherine reflected on how much their lives had changed in the months since the Queen's death. They had successfully navigated the transition to their new roles, while maintaining their commitment to their children and to each other. But they were also aware that this was still just the beginning of a much longer journey that would eventually lead them to the throne itself. The experience of their first year as Prince and Princess of Wales had taught them valuable lessons about the balance between tradition and innovation, between public duty and private life, between honoring the past and preparing for the future. These lessons would serve them well as they continued to grow into roles that would define not just their own lives, but the future of the British monarchy itself. The first anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death approached with a mixture of solemnity and anticipation. For William and Catherine, the year had been transformative in ways they had expected and others they could never have anticipated. As they prepared to mark this significant milestone, both were acutely aware of how much they had grown into their roles as Prince and Princess of Wales, while also recognizing how much more growth and adaptation lay ahead. The decision about how to commemorate the Queen's death anniversary was complex. There were official ceremonies to plan, but William and Catherine were equally focused on personal remembrance and on using the occasion to reflect on the progress they had made in honoring her legacy while establishing their own approach to royal service. Catherine had spent considerable time over the past year developing what would become her signature approach to the role of Princess of Wales. Unlike her predecessors, she brought a background in psychology and early childhood development that informed everything she did. Her initiatives were increasingly evidence-based and focused on measurable outcomes rather than just charitable visibility. Her most significant achievement during this first year had been the launch of a comprehensive early childhood development program that brought together researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and communities in an unprecedented collaborative effort. A program, which she had conceived and developed with input from leading experts, was already showing promising results in pilot communities across Britain. William's evolution as Prince of Wales had been equally impressive. He had successfully expanded his environmental work through the Earthshot Prize, while also taking on the traditional responsibilities of the Prince of Wales title. His ability to balance innovation with tradition had won him respect from both longtime royal observers and younger people who were looking for leadership on climate change and sustainability issues. The couple's partnership had strengthened considerably over the course of their first year in their new roles. They had learned to coordinate their individual initiatives while also developing joint projects that leveraged both of their strengths and interests. Their work on mental health, combining William's advocacy experience with Catherine's understanding of childhood development, had become particularly impactful. As they planned events to mark the anniversary of the Queen's death, William and Catherine decided to focus on celebration of her life and legacy, rather than prolonged mourning. They organized a series of events highlighting causes that had been important to the Queen, while also showcasing the progress they had made in advancing their own priorities over the past year. The anniversary itself began with a private family service at St. George's Chapel in Windsor, where the Queen had been buried. William and Catherine attended with their children, who had matured considerably over the course of the year, and were better able to understand and participate in the commemoration of their great-grandmother's life. George, now 10 years old, had begun to show signs of understanding the weight of his own future responsibilities. He asked thoughtful questions about the Queen's life and service, and showed particular interest in her role as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Charlotte, at 8, remained fascinated by the history and traditions of the monarchy, often asking Catherine to tell her stories about previous queens and their contributions. Louis, now 5, had developed his own special memories of the Queen and often talked about her dogs and horses. In innocent observations and questions frequently provided moments of lightness during what could otherwise be overwhelmingly serious discussions about duty, service, and responsibility. The public events marking the anniversary included visits to organizations that had been particularly meaningful to the Queen, including several military regiments, charitable organizations, and Commonwealth institutions. William and Catherine's approach to these visits demonstrated how much their understanding of their roles had deepened over the past year. At each engagement, they were able to speak knowledgeably about the history and significance of the organizations they were visiting, while also connecting that history to contemporary challenges and opportunities. Their ability to bridge past and present Tradition and innovation had become one of their greatest strengths as senior royals. Catherine's speech at a children's charity that had been one of the Queen's patronages was particularly moving when she spoke about the Queen's lifelong commitment to improving children's lives, while also outlining her own vision for how that work could be expanded and enhanced in the coming years. The speech demonstrated her growing confidence as a public speaker and her deepening expertise in her chosen field. William's contribution to the anniversary commemorations focused on the Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth. He spoke eloquently about her vision of the Commonwealth as a voluntary association of nations united by shared values rather than colonial history, and outlined his own ideas for how the organization could continue to evolve and remain relevant in the 21st century. The international response to William and Catherine's first year as Prince and Princess of Wales had been overwhelmingly positive. Their Caribbean tour had been followed by successful visits to other Commonwealth nations, and their diplomatic skills had won praise from foreign governments and international organizations. Their approach to international relations reflected a new generation of royal diplomacy, one that was more direct about acknowledging historical injustices while also emphasizing shared values and common goals. This approach had resonated particularly well with younger leaders around the world, who appreciated their honesty and authenticity. As autumn arrived, William and Catherine began planning for their second year as Prince and Princess of Wales with increased confidence and ambition. They had successfully established themselves in their new roles, and now they were ready to tackle more complex and challenging initiatives. Catherine announced plans for an international summit on early childhood development, bringing together researchers, policymakers, and practitioners from around the world to share knowledge and develop collaborative solutions to global challenges affecting children. The summit, planned for the following spring, would be the largest and most ambitious project she had ever undertaken. William, meanwhile, was preparing to launch the next phase of the Earthshot Prize, with expanded funding and participation from governments and organizations around the world. His environmental work had gained significant momentum during his first year as Prince of Wales, and he was now positioned to make it a truly global movement. The couple's work on mental health had also evolved significantly over the past year. They had moved beyond basic awareness raising to developing and supporting specific interventions and programs that were showing measurable impact on mental health outcomes in communities across Britain. Their annual Christmas card photo, released in December, showed a family that had grown more confident and comfortable with their public roles while maintaining their commitment to privacy and normalcy for their children. The image captured the balance they had achieved between public duty and private life, between tradition and modernity. As they prepared for their second Christmas as Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine reflected on how much had changed since that devastating day at Balmoral when the Queen had died. They had risen to meet the enormous challenges and opportunities that had come with their expanded roles. But more importantly, they had done so while remaining true to their values and their commitment to service. The children had adapted remarkably well to the changes in their lives, showing resilience and maturity that made both parents proud. George was beginning to show signs of the leadership qualities that would serve him well in his own future role, while Charlotte and Louis remained grounded and joyful despite the increased attention and responsibility surrounding their family. Looking ahead to the new year, William and Catherine were excited about the projects and initiatives they were planning, but they were also aware that their roles would continue to evolve and expand as King Charles III's reign progressed and as they moved closer to their own eventual accession to the throne. Their first year as Prince and Princess of Wales had been marked by grace under pressure, innovation within tradition, and genuine commitment to making a positive difference in the world. They had honored the Queen's memory while also establishing their own identity and approach to royal service. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that the monarchy could remain relevant and valuable in the modern world by adapting to contemporary challenges while maintaining the essential qualities of service, duty, and dedication that had defined the institution for centuries. As they prepared for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, William and Catherine could look back on their first year as Prince and Princess of Wales with satisfaction and pride. They had successfully navigated one of the most significant transitions in royal history, emerging stronger and more confident in their roles as future king and queen. The eyes of the world would continue to be upon them, but they had proven that they were ready for that scrutiny and capable of using their platform to make a genuine difference in the lives of people throughout Britain and the Commonwealth. Their journey toward the throne was just beginning, But they had already established themselves as worthy successors to the remarkable woman whose death had changed their lives forever. The future of the monarchy was in capable hands, guided by two people who understood both the weight of history and the possibilities of the future. William and Catherine had found their rhythm as Prince and Princess of Wales, and the world was watching with anticipation to see what they would accomplish in the years to come.